Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's conference. My name is Abby Newman, and I am Associate Director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Chicago. I will begin today's event by providing you with information about today's schedule and how you can connect with all of the co-sponsors and additional resources. We are pleased to welcome you all to the 13th Annual University of Chicago International Education Conference on Democracy in Recession, which we lovingly refer to as IEC. This conference is co-sponsored by the University of Chicago Center on Democracy, Neighborhood Schools Program, the Center for East Asian Studies, the Center for East European and Russian Eurasian Studies, and the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, with generous support from U.S. Department of Education Title VI National Resource Center grants. You will hear from some of my wonderful colleagues throughout the day, so please note that there's an amazing team that is with you today to help and has made this all possible through their hard work and efforts. So I feel very, very fortunate to have such an amazing team of colleagues. Now, today's schedule will consist of our keynote lecture on network protests and democracy in the 21st century. It will take place from approximately 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. We will then take a short break so everyone can stretch their legs, refill beverages, and then reconvene at 11 a.m. for our workshop on artistic activism, which will be followed by a Q&A session. So we expect today's activities to end at around 1 p.m. Now, before we get into more Zoom housekeeping, I want to mention that there is a wealth of information out there for you to connect with through each of the IEC co-sponsors. So we will be sharing links to all our websites in the chat box now and at the end of the conference. So we encourage you to visit these sites and sign up for our newsletters and listservs to learn more about our public events and outreach initiatives. We are all here at the University of Chicago to be a resource for you about education on international topics. So feel free to ask us questions during the Q&A portions of our program. And please note that all questions throughout the day should be entered into the chat box. So it's a good idea, keep that chat box open during the conference. Now, I'm going to share my screen now as I would like to draw your attention to one online resource for educators. So give me a second as I push the magic share screen button, and here we go. So what you're seeing right now is our UChicago Educator Outreach website. So come with me now as we take just a quick tour of the site. And the link to the UChicago Educator Outreach website is provided in the chat box right now. So on this website, you will find information about educator programs, and there are categories here that you can scroll through and look at your leisure. But today you're taking part in an international education conference. We've also had Global Views, Summer Series, which many of you I hope have participated in, Summer Institute for Educators, and there's also detailed information about past programs. So you can scroll through and see the wealth of materials about past summer institutes, and also past International Education Conference. There's also information about teaching materials, and I just want to point out that this is something where there are many ways, let me move some things around on my screen. You can actually search for things by subject, you can look up information by country, world region, and themes. So you can conduct your searches and pull up resources that are hopefully be very useful for you as educators and help, for materials you can use in your classrooms, materials you can have your students take a look at, and it's a really interesting way to look. So for example, I'll just, because East Asia, I will just take a quick look and see, hey, what have we discussed about China? And you can see that there are a ton of resources and of various tags that you can see. And you can click on and, here we are. You see, we're going to be talking about China today, but last year's Summer Institute for Educators, for example, you can go in and see information. You can look past videos, you can actually look at resources. There's a wealth of materials that you can glean off of looking not only at our educator programs, but through the specific searches for teaching materials. The other link I just want to draw your attention to is campus resources. This is a rather comprehensive list of all of our partners, not only those that we're working with today, but there are many other units on the UChicago campus that are here to provide resources related to international education. So I don't want everybody to get dizzy with me scrolling, but I just wanted to point out that we are not alone at the University of Chicago. There are many, many units that are working towards helping to support K-16 education. I also want to point out that a complete details about today's program, as we are right now, what we were participating in, is also available on the website. And I encourage you, you can learn more about the speakers, you can learn more about upcoming events. We have one other additional event, which you'll hear more about later, happening on November 9th. You'll learn more about that later. If you haven't registered already, please register. But one important thing I wanted to point out is that we do have resources. This is this spot where we have the schedule listed, and we will actually have videos of these presentations posted later. And we currently do have a list of audio resources on global democracy. And so we have some general resources, but we also have kind of region-specific resources. So I encourage you to take a look at this. And we specifically, we were very careful in how we curated this list this year, because we know that Zoom fatigue is a real problem. And so we have specifically provided information about audio resources that would be helpful: podcast, music, things like that. Okay, and I know that we have posted now, we should have posted links to the educator website, website. We also have the IEC information and also the links to the audio resources. So I encourage you during the breaks to proceed, take a look, and ask your questions, and we're here to be a resource for you. And welcome again. So I will now turn things over to my colleague, Krishna Kulkarni, who will go over some final details before introducing our keynote speaker.
Thanks so much, Abby. So my name is Krishna Kulkarni, and I'm the outreach coordinator at the UChicago Center for Middle Eastern Studies. Very excited to be here today and soon to welcome our keynote speaker. But before we begin, just one more item of housekeeping. We know that many educators are with us today and interested in receiving professional development units and/or proof of participation for today's events. For those Illinois educators from public schools who would like to receive professional development units for this event from the Illinois State Board of Education, please email your request to my colleague, Connie Yip, and she will then follow up with specific instructions and paperwork to claim those credits. Her email address is provided in the chat box, and you'll see it just in a moment. For any educators who are not public school teachers in Illinois, please, that includes private school teachers in Illinois, and would like to receive a generic certificate of completion from the University of Chicago for participating in activities that are part of our International Education Conference series, we also ask that you email Connie Yip with your request. Please just specify that you are looking for the generic non-public school certificate of attendance. Her contact information, as I said, is provided in the chat box. Please do note that we will process and prepare these certificates the week of November 9th after all of our IEC activities are done. So once again, just navigate to the chat box if you're looking for professional development credits. We are just going to wait a couple minutes while our keynote speaker arrives. So if you need to grab a coffee or do any final prep before the lecture begins, please do so now. Hi, Zeynep.
There we go. Finally, I was in waiting room for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your name just popped up for some reason. I'm so sorry about that.
Not a problem. You know, we're Zooming. This is how it goes.
Absolutely. Yeah, we may as well get started. Thank you so much for being here, Zeynep.
My pleasure.
And we can proceed with our keynote lecture. We are really honored to have with us today Zeynep Tufekci. Dr. Tufekci is an associate professor at the UNC School of Information and Library Science, a principal researcher at Carolina's Center for Information, Technology, and Public Life, and a faculty associate at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. She's a contributing writer for The Atlantic and regularly writes columns for the New York Times, Wired, and Scientific American. Her book, Twitter and Tear Gas, The Ecstatic, Fragile Politics of Network Protests in the 21st Century, Yale University Press 2018, examines the dynamics, strengths, and weaknesses of 21st century social movements. Dr. Tufekci's research interests revolve around the intersection of technology and society. Her academic work focuses on social movements and civics, privacy and surveillance, and social interaction. And she's become a go-to source for national and international media outlets looking for insights on the impact of social media and the growing influence of machine algorithms. For more information on Professor Tufekci and to watch her 3 TED Talks, please visit the website link provided in the chat box. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Zeynep.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be able to join you guys in this very eventful morning. And I'm sure you guys have other things on your mind besides what I'm about to talk about. But I think they're related. So that's going to be my little pitch about, I know the news is very interesting right now, but it really has been deeply connected to the work I've been doing or trying to do about how social media has been affecting the way the public sphere works. So let me sort of trace back a little bit and say that I am primarily a researcher of the public sphere and technology and how these things interact. And one of my big interests has long been the social movements and various ways in which new kinds of power have risen up and have been subverted around the world. And I'm originally myself from Turkey, which is kind of an important part of this story, because I grew up in a really censored environment. I grew up in a military coup, let's say, under the shadow of a military coup in Turkey, though in Turkey, that's not saying a lot. We have lots of military coups all the time. But it was a defining experience for me in that I grew up without access to a lot of information, and I grew up under a setting in which the government basically controlled the only radio station in the FM, controlled the TV almost completely. So, and I started out as a programmer. I started out thinking, wow, you know, the technology is interesting and excited. I was on the technical side for a lot of reasons. It was the right career path, I thought, for me. But it allowed me to do something that showed me a vision of the future that I was very excited about. And that is, I got to work and see global networks in action before the internet even came to Turkey, right? I started working as a teenager, and one of the jobs I had was with IBM. And even though internet wasn't yet in Turkey, IBM had an intranet globally where I could talk to people. And it was my first experience of an uncensored global network where, you know, those utopias that you hear about the early internet that people kind of dismissed, you know, the sort of the utopian place where there is race and gender and class don't matter and just ideas meet. Well, the early internet had that feel, and I had that feel when I logged onto IBM's intranet, because, like, in my home country, I was a teenager, I was a girl, I was in a technical field, so I faced a lot of obstacles because of who I was. But when I went on this network and asked a question, like, nobody could even tell what my name was, where I was from, what was going on, how old I was, even my gender. And I would just get into discussions and get answers. And I thought, this is amazing. This is going to change everything. This is going to be so different when we all have access to this technology. So when the internet finally did come, of course, I immediately logged on as, one of the earliest people in Turkey, probably. And I thought, this is going to change everything. And I thought it was going to empower dissidents around the world. It's going to empower people against censorship. It's going to do all those things. And that happened. So I know and I'm going to get to it, there's a lot of reasons to be wary of the downsides of the way the internet has evolved, but it has empowered dissidents. It has empowered anti-censorship. It has made a lot of things possible that weren't possible before. But in a way, that's not turned out to be the way we had thought, right? The way we had hoped for. And I'm just seeing, it says, I just saw the chat box say, if you have questions, type here. Yeah, that would be, I'm definitely going to leave time for a question and answer, and I'd love to have that conversation. But it wasn't the way I hoped. And one of the things that I came to realize is my research after the Arab Spring in Middle East and North Africa, and also in the US and Europe, the Occupy movement, the Indignados movement, all those movements were really significant turning points. And they were movements that I did a lot of research in. And when they happened, you looked at it and you saw that, for example, the Occupy movement in the United States, it was the biggest movement of its type until that date. And in fact, with just 2 weeks notice, there was a global Occupy kind of march, the sort of anti-inequality, the 99%, like with just 2 weeks notice, there was a global march, and it was the largest global march ever organized, right? It was very large. And you saw that pattern again and again since, right? The big protests in Tahrir Square, in my home country in Turkey, the Women's March. There's always this biggest protest ever happening. But the policy side and the government side isn't moving the same way, which was my intellectual question. Like, if we have all these giant protest movements that we see in the past have corresponded to pressuring those in power in more effective ways, we're having larger than ever protests, and social media is enabling and helping. But why are they facing so many challenges so quickly? Why do they seem to fizzle faster than they have come up? Like, what is going on? So that's the part I was really curious about. And one of the things I noticed is that in a lot of countries around the world, the dissidents were indeed using technology quite effectively, social media quite effectively, to organize, to get the word out, to try to sort of do things that wouldn't otherwise. For example, in Egypt, this website, not website, I'm sorry, Facebook page, where all Khalid Said was crucial to organizing those large protests in Tahrir. But just a couple of years after, there was a major coup in Egypt by the military, and the opposition decimated. And of course, looking at some of those, I thought, the level of repression they face in Egypt, maybe they never had a chance. But there was another movement in Turkey, Gezi Park protests, which I did a lot of direct research in. And there too, I started seeing a similar pattern that wasn't just explainable by the repression or the sort of harshness of it that they faced. But these movements were unable to take what I would call tactical turns. What would happen is they would get together social media in large numbers, right, with a slogan. You know, we want President Mubarak to resign, or, you know, save Gezi Park, or whatever it was. The slogan spread on social media. It was very widespread. It was quite important in many ways in getting people together, but it didn't really give people the time or the chance to have built the kind of movement that in the past would have created more durable mechanisms for decision making, right? Because if in comparison, for example, the one I think about a lot is the civil rights movement in the United States. From idea to execution, it took about 10 years. It took about 10 years to get to a place where they could hold the march. And it took them a year to 6 months to a year to do the logistics. You have similar pattern all over the civil rights movement, like the famous Montgomery bus boycott. It was in planning for a long time. And when they did start it, they had 60 some organizations that crisscrossed the city. And one of the things they had to do was figure out how to pay for the carpools that were necessary, right? You had to pay because people weren't taking the buses, but they needed to get to work, and that created a challenge. And what they did was that they met weekly, right? They met, they met daily in a church to try to figure out just the logistics, which meant that every day they were meeting to make decisions, and they had done so for years, like this kind of durable organizational structure. So when they faced a challenge from the authorities, they already had in place a way to make decisions and respond. In contrast, if, like I said, with Occupy, you go from 2 weeks to let's have a global protest march, and then you have the biggest march ever, you do not have the kind of either organizational strength or even just a way of knowing each other so you can trust each other and realize how do you do some give and take and how do you make a decision. And then, of course, these movements did face challenges and they floundered. All they could do was they could just repeat what they had come out for the first time, and just, you know, the dissidents in Egypt, they would try to go back to Tahrir Square as if like that was a magic rather than a political confluence. So I saw this again and again, and I started likening to going from 0 to 100 miles in a car that doesn't have a steering wheel, right? You get plopped into the car, but you haven't really had to build the car, so you have no steering wheel with the car. And that created a huge problem when you need to turn, right? Make a decision. In addition, social media companies are in the business of gathering our attention, right? They are in the business of collecting our attention and selling our eyeballs to the advertisers through vast surveillance. And while that allows for these things to be free to the users, which is definitely important for the reach they have, they don't really allow for deliberative discussions, because how could they, right? They're there to be engaging, and engaging is what's inflammatory or cute or outrageous, right? It's not reasoned back and forth discussion. It's definitely not consensus. It's definitely not finding a way to end the meeting. I'm suspecting there's a lot of academics among us right now, if not all of us, or people who are kind of in either nonprofit or academic world. And when you go into a meeting, I don't know about you, but the first thing I'm thinking is, when is this meeting ending, right? I'm like, when are we done with this meeting? When can we have a decision and finish this? Whereas social media companies, their main goal and their design is to keep you there as long as possible, and just sort of have your eyeballs there. That is the worst possible place to try to have any kind of tactical decision making, right? It's very good for conflict. It's very good for, like, you know, you can dunk on people, you can have sectarian fights, you can polarize the in-group, out-group process, but it's not a place that allows for deliberative decision, which is what movements need when they face tactical challenges, which they always do. There's no way in which they can avoid this problem, because I sometimes liken this to Silicon Valley companies that go from 0 to, like, I don't know, 100 million users very quickly. They also face a problem, but they are then joined by VCs, right? Venture capital that rescues them, whereas a social movement is facing a government, an opposition. Like, they're not going to be rescued, they're going to be challenged, and they cannot do that. Further, one of the things social movements has done is, social media has done is lower the threshold of gatekeeping. It's increased some kinds of gatekeeping. As I said, like deliberative, calm, reasoned things don't get the same virality as something that's outrageous and grabs attention. But also they allow for a new kind of censorship, which is censorship by information glut and loss of credibility, right? You can kind of confuse and muddy the water instead of censoring. And that way you are once again cutting off the link between information and action, right? In the past, you would cut the link between information and action by censoring the information. Whereas right now you're doing it by allowing, because you can't not, censorship doesn't work the same way, while allowing the true information or useful information to go forward, but also flooding the zone with misinformation, challenges to the credibility of the information, with distraction, with all these things. So in the end, you're like, I don't know what on earth is true. There are many topics right now that until and unless I do a lot of research, which I'm able to do because I'm an academic, I have time, I can read papers, I can do a lot of things. I have no idea what is actually going on. Like, it's in a weird way, there's never been a better time to be informed, because what I end up doing is I go and ask an expert on social media that I trust. But I can do that, right? I have a large social media presence, and I know people, and people respond to me. But if I didn't have that, sometimes I'm so confused, and I end up reading direct research papers to try to understand what on earth is going on topics that are in my field. This is ridiculous. Like, I should be able to have some authoritative sources to go to, but there's so many competing claims and this and that. And it takes a lot of effort to be informed in a situation like this, even though there's more information than ever, including useful information, correct information. And that actually makes for a very good moment for an authoritarian, because they only need to muddy the waters and discourage the idea that change is possible, rather than necessarily lie and convince you. Just discouraging is quite effective. And in many ways, that is what we have seen around the world. We do not see successful attempts at censorship outside of China, which is a very different case. But even there, it's not like there's, I'm just going to leave that aside. It's too complicated to kind of make generalizations about China. But in most of the rest of the world, the internet is more or less there in a way that is not easy to censor. But yet it is not very informative. If anything, it is more confusing to more people in ways that empower the authoritarians rather than disempowering them. It's the way I talk about this is that, you know, we cheer it on when dissidents in Egypt find each other and go online, but white supremacists in Europe do the same thing. It's not your pony that only does what you want it to do, while social media companies only want to address these problems procedurally, right? They do not want to have judgment passed on the substance, but they do judge algorithmically in that more outrageous content from whatever part of the political persuasion is, and more sort of conflict driven stuff, as well as things that bond people, right? This is in-group, out-group, like the cute stuff. They're all over. Like if you're on Facebook, that's what you got, right? Both the polarization and the bonding. And those are two sides of the same coin, right? In-group and out-group. So we've come to a place, I thought, seeing all of this, you know, what we're calling network authoritarianism, we've come to a place where things are far less than ideal for rational discussion, and also for social movements dedicated to positive change, because they can organize, but they cannot adapt fast or make decisions, and they haven't found ways to I mean, social media is too useful to let go, because it does allow for great narrative power. But on the other hand, its weaknesses have not been addressed. And authoritarians have flooded into this space, aided by the tools, the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, that are not necessarily sympathetic to them, but the way they operate is very much aligned with the way the authoritarians function and what they want to do. And the kind of sort of liberal or democratic awakening that many of us had hoped for with the early internet, it's not the attempts aren't there, but the counter attempts have been around the world, I think, stronger. And we're seeing this sort of illiberal democracy, majoritarian authoritarianism, where elections are won, but the sort of democracy or institutions of democracy are subverted. And we see this all around the world, and it's very closely linked to the rise of the technology. It's very closely linked to the way things have been working around the world. And so that's kind of the book I wrote, which I'm sorry, I am going to just turn this off. It's pinging. So the way that these things are working is something I had written about in my book, the Twitter and Tear Gas book. By the way, there's a Creative Commons copy available. I mean, I don't mind it if people ever want to buy it, but as an academic, I had the pleasure and the honor of getting a legal PDF out of the publisher after telling them, you can do this legally, or we can do this the other way. You know how that goes. So I'm just letting you know that if you go to my book's website and go to the bottom, or just Google, you know, my book in PDF, you get a legal copy. And it's kind of funny. There's a site that outranks mine that has the same legal copy, but it's the site that does it the other way around. I mean, I don't mind it. I put it there exactly so people wouldn't have to face a tension that probably lasts half a second before downloading the not so legal copy. But that's the stuff I wrote about in 2016. And it's come to be in a lot of parts of the world, and people kind of ask me, how are you so prescient? And I'm like, I'm actually not that prescient. It's just that Americans are late to the game. You know, I'm from Turkey, I'm from the Middle East, and you could have asked anybody from Philippines, India, I don't know, you know, name your country, and this thing has been happening this way for a while in lots of places. I just happen to be more international in my research and the way I look at these things. Yeah, somebody has put my book's website, and that's kind of like, and so I know that we're kind of here, you know, with an election that our populist right-wing president has lost. And I'm just writing a piece that's about to come out, basically saying that's far from the end of it, because the same dynamics are here, and our populist authoritarian had kind of stumbled into this with the help of social media. But if you look around the world, this is not some aberration that is just specific to the United States. It is something that is deeply structural, and it comes with, at the end of a period of elite failure, right? A period in which the old ways of governing have been failing people. The kind of way corporate globalization is working has been failing people in our field. Education as a form of social mobility has been increasingly challenged. There's been entrenched elites. I mean, it's not that it's all terrible, of course. Like when I say this, it sounds like I'm not discounting all the positive things that have happened over the last few decades for large numbers of groups. But in many ways, the social contract is broken and our institutions aren't functioning. And it's in that particular historic moment that we're facing what we're facing, and the social media is playing out the way it's playing out. And those are the things I research. And as educators, we, I mean, on the one hand, I'm an educator. So when we say, oh, let's teach people more critical thinking, I'm all for it. It's great for my particular business model. But on the other hand, there's a emergency right in front of us that, you know, you can't just snap your fingers and educate billions of people. And on the third hand, there's a structural failing of how our institutions are working that is just not dealt with. And these are the things I'm thinking about. And we're right at the halfway point. And what I want to do is I want to give you guys like a few minutes to type the questions. And I'm going to have to take a very short break, and I'll be right back. And then, I mean, I sort of really like the conversation aspect of it. So if we have some questions, I'll come back and both look at the questions and kind of do this however you guys want to moderate it.
Yeah, Zeynep, what we can do is, and this is also for everybody else, you can type your questions in the chat box, and then we'll prioritize ones that are about teaching this topic. And you know what we'll do is we'll just ask you to unmute yourself once Zeynep's back, and you can ask the question directly. But thank you so much for your fascinating talk, and we're going to now move into
I will be back in like very few minutes. I will just wait for the questions. Thank
Sounds
you.
good. So everybody, please feel free to type your questions into the Zoom chat box. And once we have a list of them, and once Zeynep is back, I will just call on you and ask you to unmute yourself, and you can ask Zeynep directly and have an exchange hopefully. So yeah, and if you need to take a break as well, now's the time. Cool. So welcome back, Zeynep. Still waiting on some questions, though I thought I would start one that I usually ask speakers at our workshops, which is, if you had 3 books to recommend, and I suppose your book can be one of them, but 3 books or articles or other kinds of sources, films, documentaries that you would recommend to educators for informing themselves about the issues surrounding networked protests in the 21st century, as well as possibly using in their classrooms. What would they be, and where can they access them?
That's an interesting question. I think like not the network protests, but I think there's been a lot of good books on sort of the social media side of things. And let me just give you the correct names, because I was like, I'm a content person. I remember exactly what the content is. I forget the name of my own book. So I'm going to give you the exact things. Algorithm. So one of them is Safiya Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. And the other one is Virginia Eubanks's book, which was called, I think, yeah, Automating Inequality. And what would be a good third companion to all of those in terms of, let me see what, I mean, there's a lot of good books on these topics. I'm just kind of thinking, what would be the good third one if I had to assign a. Probably, you know, see, it's not, again, anti-social media by Siva Vaidyanathan might be a third one that goes about the aspects of social media that are, I mean, it's called antisocial, but it's like highlighting the business model and how that operates. So I would put those into the, you know, just 3 recommendations. All right, I'm looking at the questions.
Matthew, I'll ask you to unmute and you can ask your question directly. And I will also send out a list with these resources to everybody after the conference.
Hi, Dr. Tufekci. I was just wondering about groups that seem to pop up and how educators or students or anybody can try to weigh the reality of a group. Like how big is it really and how much is it more of a tempest in a teapot? Thank you.
So yeah, I'm reading your question too, and it's I think it's unknown, you know, because it's not that social media is not powerful. It's just that it's subverted the order of things, right? In the past, you had to do this massive organizing and then you could have a protest. And right now you have the massive protest and then it's a question, will you have the massive organizing afterwards? It's unknown, right? So I think it's not good to dismiss it because there's a lot of, there's like criticisms like slacktivism, which I think are misplaced because it's not unreal. It's not unvirtual. It can be super powerful in some ways, but it can be misleading because if you think like previous movements and you think, wow, if they can pull off this big march, they must be powerful. And that's an outdated way of thinking. They can pull that off without having the rest of the muscle required for pulling off the things. So I would be like, sometimes me too, right? We are educators and we sort of get into this. In my time, we had to kind of mode, and that's, I think, incorrect. And I don't think we should encourage dismissing and kind of emphasize something called real life as if social media is not part of real life, but say, look, this is a tool that changes the fabric of how we do things. And it realigns things in a way that things that have different kinds of power and different kinds of weaknesses, and you have to look at it as what it is and then try to understand, like, is it, for example, it might have a lot of people, it might have narrative power, but is it able to make decisions and face tactical challenges? Does it have that kind of depth of organization? Does it have strategic savvy? Does it have like all those other things that movements that take a long time to organize have, and these social media big ones do not necessarily have, but could develop, which would make them powerful? So that's kind of like a complicated answer, but I'm really wary because a lot of times we do say slacktivism and kind of dismiss it, and that doesn't seem the right answer either. And hello, for example, he knows, right?
Hi, I'm Abby Newman. I don't know, Krishna, are you still, Krishna's there? Okay, I know. I'm Abby Newman. I work at the Center for East Asian Studies, and I couldn't help but notice, I know your comment where you said, we can't talk about China, or we don't want to make generalizations about China, and I completely.
I mean, I can talk about China. I just didn't want to fold it into the rest of the planet.
Of course. No, I completely understand that. No, and I mean, I don't know if you wanted to mention a little bit, because if you wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm often amazed at how, though there are restrictions, the way that people are creatively able to utilize language, utilize satire in order to make their points. They can break through the firewall and all of that. And I don't know if you wanted to make some comments, but I also see we do have another question coming in. So if you wanted to just talk, comparatively a little bit, but I see that we do have an educator who has also raised a question. So.
Right. So I can definitely talk a little bit about China. The thing with the Chinese experience is that while they do have a firewall, it depends to a large degree on some level of cooperation from the public, because as you say, there are many ways to get around it, and their censorship would not work if they completely lost legitimacy. So it's not like this complete totalitarianism. They have a very active public sphere. And interestingly, research from like early on shows that they don't really censor complaints about the government. What they censor, there's three things that the Chinese censorship seems to go for mostly. One of them is anything aimed at collective action. So you can complain, but not organize.
Yes.
In fact, if anything, they seem to use complaints like a petition to the emperor and address them, because China's perennial problem, like any authoritarian government that's big, is blindness. In fact, arguably, that's what got them with the pandemic, is that the local authorities in Wuhan covered up, I think, from the central government, but that's a whole other discussion. So they don't censor the complaints about the collective organizing. They do censor things that are directed at the people in power and the corruption, because that would weaken them. And also they censor complaints about the censorship because the censors are thin-skinned, right? But it's not true that you can't go on social media on China and complain about government. Like people do it all the time. And in fact, it's an effective participatory mechanism often in letting the government see what problems are while not allowing itself to be subjected to challenge. That said, there was some evidence that that has changed recently, that it got more authoritarian and more surveillant. And interestingly, I think that weakened their government by increasing their blindness, right? Because too much surveillance and too much censorship, like you have problems you don't know, right? It's kind of this mix. So that's sort of the Chinese experience, I think. And also, like, I mean, whatever else you want to say, it is very authoritarian, but the country pulled in hundreds of millions of people from deep rural poverty into like poor but lower middle class existence within one generation. There's a kind of legitimacy that comes with that kind of economic growth that usually lasts at least one generation, and going forward they're going to of course have problems, and so that remains to be seen. So that's kind of, and I think, I think a lot about China, and I did a lot of research in Hong Kong last year because I was very interested, and it's as close as I could get to that interface and to try to examine how China works. But it's, I think it's like not where I was seeing 4 or 5 years ago, but it's too early to say where it's going to land, because with the pandemic and the global realignment, it's kind of, I'm a little wary of putting 1 billion people with this deep infrastructure and their own technology in the same basket as the rest of us, where we're kind of sharing a similar social media environment. All right, let me see. Have you watched this election unfold? Like everybody else, it's I really don't have like one big answer. I don't really have like I'm watching. Well, in many ways, I'm watching the sort of social media part of it very closely, but I think it's just begun. Like in terms of, there is now, unlike 2016, there's a recognition that there are negative externalities to social media for the public sphere that must be addressed. And I think going forward, it'll be one big tension, and I genuinely don't know, like, exactly how that will play out. All right, how do we manage save the children? Yeah, so I mean, the problematic social movements, I mean, as I said, like, this thing is not our pony. It doesn't just encourage groups we like. right? And that kind of, the QAnon kind of things are, of course, there. But interestingly, and let me see, where is it? It was under my computer right now. Satanic Panic, right? This is my book. It is holding my computer up. That's why my computer moved, because I'm reading it, because I kind of vaguely had some idea of it, but there was these huge satanic panics in the 80s and early 90s that were spread by, traditional media and perhaps academic conferences and all of that. So I think it's important to realize that it's not that novel in some sense to have these exaggerated fears and paranoia and conspiracy theories around children, especially being affected, but that in the social media environment, they can spread in ways that would have been harder, if not impossible, in the previous era.
I'll pop in with another question if that's okay. It won't be
Sure.
about China. I'm curious from kind of a comparative perspective, if you were going to, let's say, look at, we're talking about what's happening in the US and what I think there's been wonderful questions about looking at whether it be the election, whether it be looking at, particular political or social activism and campaigns that are, just behind the name, that kind of thing. How would you advise educators, particularly like high school, let's say, how would you advise them to think about, well, let's look at other regions of the world and draw some of these lines and to kind of bring the examples. So it brings like the global local in a way into the classroom.
Right.
Like, how do you have any advice on that? Because, we're bombarded with not only the amount of information. I don't want to use that fake, that FN word, the fake news, or just, but it's true. Like, you look at these resources, you look at how do you present balanced perspectives when you know that there's so much, there's so many different biases and things that are out there, but how do you help bring the global local? Because that these our children, and I mean, just they're trying to figure out, make their way in this world. Like, is there something that you can kind of help them to become better global citizens and help these educators understand a little bit more of how to make those connections?
It's clearly complicated, but in some ways, they do have advantages. I mean, the young generation, whatever else they are, I mean, researchers, they're kind of less gullible to certain kinds of fakery because they grew up understanding like not all influencers are real and that not every website is a newspaper. Like they're more inherent to this thing. And as for globalization, like they're necessarily global, like they're playing Among Us, right? And it's a global game. They could have lots of sorts of people from around the world playing with them. So the kind of international experience is weirdly in some ways there. But one of the best things might be, to the degree possible, they're sure, especially in this country, to have students from around the world or first generation, immigrant families in their classroom. And there's nothing like that personal connection to understand there are lots of different places in the world and not just this one. And there are different perspectives. So I would kind of say that they have existing strengths that we can play to, including their exposure to the stuff that our generation might have been more gullible to because they grew up around it. They're more internationally experienced very often, just necessarily. And the fact that in this country, there's a lot of first generation people who are in the classroom and kind of just to foster that kind of critical thinking we talk about. It is just not easy. A lot of times they'll say, why don't we teach critical thinking? I'm like, yeah, right, wave a magic wand. It's really not something you can do in one classroom or one thing, but we can contribute to it. And over a lifetime, it coalesces into a skill. But I don't think like on one semester anywhere, even with the most brilliant teacher, will do it, because it's a combination of knowing facts, having tried, assessing, seeing results, and kind of this lifelong thing, including for all of us.
All right. Well, I know this is a super busy time for you, Zeynep. So
I hadn't realized. I'm super happy to be here, but I have a feeling like rest of you, I had forgotten this is election week when we were setting the date. So I kind of got, because as you say, it's just historically fascinating to watch for somebody who studies what I study.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we did want to just thank you so much for taking the
Well,
time.
thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you for
yeah.
the great questions.
It's much appreciated. And we're just we would have a big round of applause in real life, but I suppose chat messages.
Well, I have the, I feel like I get it from the chat messages as well.
Great. Well, yeah, again, thank you so much for your time. And we hope that you're all enjoying the conference so far. We're looking forward to more dialogue and exchange after we take a short break. So please go stretch your legs and refill those coffee mugs. Thanks so much, Zeynep. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.